Welcome to this latest edition of the iGaming Exchange. My name's Joe Ewens. I'm an independent journalist covering the global gambling industry. And among the other places you'll find me is with Hipster on their wonderful e-gaming website, and occasionally hosting these excellent exchange webinars. We're going to talk about the US market today, all the twists and turns, exciting stuff that's happening. If if you are at all familiar with the US market, you'll probably know these three gentlemen. One of us, a very nice American flag in the background, Bill. 4th of July coming up. You'll know their faces, I'm sure, and their names. But there's always new people around, so we should probably let them introduce themselves. Let's go, Jeremy, Martin, and Bill, because that's the audio on my screen. So, Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, introducing yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Jeremy Kleiman. I am the head of the gaming law practice group at Sabre, a law firm in New Jersey. And we cover all of the U.S. From a regulatory, compliance, commercial point of view.
Lovely. Martin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Lechka. I got 17 years in the industry by now. The gray hair, I might have overused that joke before, probably still gives it away, and it's getting worse. I'm not too delighted to report. These days, I am Vice President Institutional Affairs at Odin GG, that the audience might know as one of the major esports odds providers to the industry, and branching into other areas. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Bill, you seem to be in position now.
Yeah, I can't. This system's not great with I can't get out of my car because it's not untethering to the phone. So
your
I'm in
views
position,
will be just as insightful inside a car. Why don't you introduce yourself very quickly, Bill?
Bill Pasquale III. I'm with Princeton Public Affairs Group, and just to be short and sweet and cut to the punch, I have a global gaming practice, attorney, advisory services, licensing, lobbying, and all.
Wonderful. Very succinct from the three of you. Thank you very much. Gives us plenty of time to get into the kind of the meat of what's going on. There's plenty to talk about. I think if you'd made a prediction of what we start by talking about, you would have won, because we're going to talk about predictions. Still, the kind of the issue driving more headlines than anything else when it comes to the VCI gaming market in the US. Seems to be we're in a kind of pitched battle phase of the development of prediction markets. You've got the CFTC on one side, along with the operators, and looks like state regulators on the other. Jeremy, maybe if I could come to you first. I mean, could you kind of characterize the situation with predictions at the moment, and maybe pick out some of what are these key kind of battlegrounds that we should be paying attention to?
Sure. So, look, I think it's fair to say that the legal landscape right now is a mess, which, depending on which side of the argument you're on, is either a really good thing or a bad thing. And so, look, there are two, primary battlegrounds. One is in federal court, and one is in, state court. The states that have and others that have challenged predictions in state court have seemed to, are having a good track record. And sort of there's a split in the federal courts. I mean, we can go into the details. I don't think people want to hear, all the gory details of various litigation in different courts. But suffice it to say, it's a mess. And so until it's resolved, it's fair game, right? Except for those states that have said it's not fair game. So there's just uncertainty, and I don't know when we're going to have any kind of clarity. We can get into the politics, which overlays all of this, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of years.
Thanks. Yeah, we will talk a little bit about the politics of it all in a minute, I think. Bill, how are you viewing the predictions space at the moment? I mean, do you concur that it's sort of a chaotic environment, which, as Jeremy says, suits some people?
It depends on which side of the fence you sit on. Yes, there's some legal gray, but I think that it's pretty clear to me where this is going. The CFTC, which is the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, is full-born regulating this. The White House has signed off on the regs. I don't believe that states can make this illegal. I don't think they have the authority to do it. And so the courts will sort out. But I would say three things, Joe. One, New Jersey just tried to pass a bill just this past Sunday. It got out of committee when I advised the legislature that they're playing a very dangerous game if they want to be successful, because they were trying to regulate it and tax it. So they amended the bill to pull the regulation out, but they kept the tax. And then the predictive markets companies, all of them collaboratively, and we know that certain companies like CME and Robinhood are different. They're more platforms and exchanges than, the Kalshis, Polymarkets, Crypto.com. But the bill is now held. And that's not a good look for state regulators across the country that are trying to manage this, number one. Number two, as long as the president of the United States is Donald Trump, even though I'm no fan and I'm not a Trumpian at all, I'm a Democrat, I would put my money on the White House for the next 2.5 years. If this does go to the Supreme Court, I'm pretty confident the way it's going to come out. I was just talking to several states, including Nevada, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania yesterday. They're thinking of maybe 2 to 3 years before it goes to the Supreme Court. Whatever the case, you have the Nevada state-based case, you have the New Jersey Third Circuit federal case. I think the states have a better chance with a state case. But, if you're going to make predictive markets gambling, then you might as well say that the SEC is gambling too. Stock trading. What's the difference? So when FanDuel and DraftKings bowed out of the AGA last fall and jumped into the predictive markets industry, as well as many others, I think that speaks volumes to what's happening. Now, some would say they want their cake and eat it too, but so what? Everybody does that commercially and in the business world.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Martin, I don't know exactly how Odin sort of interacts with predictions, if at all. But you're a very experienced person in the gambling industry. I mean, where are you coming at prediction markets from? I mean, kind of what's your view of how they interact with kind of your work, but also just broadly the US online gaming space?
Well, I believe it's fair to say, to give you but one example, that these days you would struggle to walk more than 2 yards at any gambling industry event, as you may have experienced yourself, without hearing the ominous words, prediction markets. And we've all done panels about prediction markets, and it's not always the case. That's also fair to say that the prediction markets platforms, exchanges, all the operators would be that keen on engaging with these events. It sort of feels like talking about the elephant in the room that is not really in the room. So that is one. Two, no doubt in my mind that Jeremy and Bill have just now covered all the critical basics, and will come on to talk about the politics of it. Joe, and I'm sure you'll be asking questions about how the likes of the 28th US presidential election might impact that. Needless to say, and it's very clear that as things stand right now, CFTC has the backing of the White House, which plays a critical role here. And perhaps one final point, just to a large extent, hot off the press, as you guys might have seen. Illinois is the state that has literally in the last few days sought to tax Kalshi and the other prediction markets platforms in the state, and also sought to force them to obtain an Illinois license on top of their CFTC federal license. The tax was supposed to have kicked in yesterday, and the latest appears to be that because Kalshi has sued the state of Illinois, that enforcement of the tax has been suspended. It has been parked for now. So I believe there is another twist. That long story short, I think trying to go down the tax route, brushing aside whether it will ultimately be successful or not, might, without trying to contradict myself, be a more, it's quite interesting route to figure out this whole conundrum as opposed to opting for the likes of cease and desist orders. One final point. In my book, it all feels like a massive deja vu, a rerun, what we've experienced first in the global online gambling industry, then with the likes of, and I appreciate the nuances and differences, but still, the grand scheme of things. What we've also seen in connection with the likes of sweepstakes before the DFS, these days DFS 2.0. So there seems to be a pattern. The critical difference being, to Bill and Jeremy's point, that at least in the States, and we could talk about the global side of things as well, if that's of interest, but in the States, there's a regulator and prediction markets are considered licensed and regulated. More and more guidance, likely more and more further down the track. But that, in my mind, is the starting point.
Joe, I want to pick up on, if I can, on what Martin was saying about the taxes. This is all about, in my view, this is all about tax revenue and lost tax revenue to the states. When players are moving to prediction market platforms instead of traditional licensed sports betting, it's all about, what the states are not extracting from it. And so, and that's all, taxes is politics. And that's really what this is all about. We can have an esoteric debate about whether it's gambling, whether it's betting or something else. Of course it's gambling. And as Martin said, it's sanctioned right now under federal law until it's not. And the fight really is going to be over how the states recoup their lost tax revenue from the licensed sports books.
Yeah, thank you. That does seem to come down to tax, as you say. I mean, I'd like to pick up a little bit on, the CFTC have come up with a kind of proposal for the set of rules to kind of slightly more strictly govern these things. I guess the most interesting thing, and what I wanted to ask, maybe Bill, I'll come to you on this first. Is there a vulnerability, you think, around prediction markets with sports integrity? I mean, if is there a risk there? Is there a vulnerability there in terms of they seem to be winning every argument at the moment, but is that a real risk? And do you think the rules that have been suggested are enough to kind of contain that?
Yeah, Joe, a couple of things. The rules, since Selig was put into place last fall, and then the other commissioners fled, we only have a commission of 1 instead of 5. And that's fine by Trump. He likes to, sort of rift things. I think they've done a good first jab at the regulations, but it's an evolving process. It's not like this is it. I mean, I think there was a black eye, not necessarily legally, but in terms of public perception and political perception, when folks were taking bets on the Ayatollah getting killed, or when the U.S. military officer placed bets on when we were going to invade Venezuela and things of that nature. I think they're cleaning that up. Is it perfect? No. And again, I don't want to be, because sometimes snippets come out of these podcasts. I am not at all a Trumpian. However, I think they're doing what every other state in the nation has done when they passed sports betting after PASPA's repeal. It's an evolving thing. It's not bulletproof. And so, no, I don't think, Joe, there is an issue with sports integrity, because if there's an issue with sports integrity with prediction markets, then there's got to be an issue with sports integrity with sports betting. I think, by the way, and I was just at a really cool beach bar last night to watch the U.S. game. And I got to tell you something. Every 18, 19, 20-year-old, 21-year-old, the folks in their 20s, they were all on Kalshi. They're not on DraftKings or FanDuel. And they were putting their punts in on those games. And they just like the user experience better. And I think that's why DraftKings and FanDuel pivoted when they did last fall. I think the integrity issues will always be around, right? But I think they're sorting through them. And I don't think it's going to be a black eye, ultimately.
Interesting. Okay. Martin, would you agree that predictions are just as exposed on sports integrity as conventional sports betting?
Well, first of all, if I may, I would make a distinction between insider trading and sports integrity. I do agree with Bill that the level of exposure is, by and large, the same when it comes to prediction markets and more traditional sports books. As Jeremy pointed out, we could be spending hours of having a theoretical, if not esoteric, if not slightly lunatic debate about the legal status of the whole ecosystem. But let's work on the assumption that there's a bunch that is CFTC regulated, a bunch that is regulated by the states and the likes of DraftKings and FanDuel that have jumped on both bandwagons. But back to your question. Yeah, sports integrity. I would even go as far as to argue that in that regard, as long as indeed they have robust processes in place, the likes of Kalshi, Polymarket, Robinhood, and all the others, and they seem to have worked very strenuously on those, having even more eyes across the sports ecosystem, be it the major leagues, NCAA, global markets, the World Cup, very topical right now for obvious reasons, will ultimately help. So in other words, as Bill has said as well, the same argument as the one that we've relied upon in connection with sports betting absolutely stands. Insider trading, because in its heart of hearts, we're talking regarding prediction markets about derivative contracts and potentially swaps. So in hearts of hearts, it's a stock market contract or a financial services contract. That's where insider trading and then elevated level of risk comes in. So that is being addressed, including by the means of the latest CFTC regulation. But still, in my book, this is not only practically legally, but also politically, this is the biggest exposure that the prediction markets platforms currently have, and something they do need to continue addressing. One final point, as Bill pointed it out, the age limit difference. Talking 18 years of age to be eligible to open an account with prediction markets platform, and in most US states, as you would know, some exceptions, 21. There's a 3-year gap, which, and that is the point I was going to make, brings up the issue that Jeremy, Bill, and I have discussed about, addressed on these podcasts ad nauseum and for years and years, and that is, these guys don't call it responsible gambling, they call it responsible trading. So that, in my book, will need to be addressed by both the industry itself, but also going forward, the CFTC or the NFA, the two co-regulators. And the latest guidance addresses it only at the very, very high level, because as you all know, it's focused on insider trading and some of the markets that are rather, let's call them not so moral or unethical? Like, when is Ayatollah Khamenei gonna get killed?
I want to come on to talk about the politics is all very, but very, very quickly, Jeremy, I'm interested in your thoughts on that kind of. Do you think the regulatory framework as exists is robust enough to protect from these kind of insider trading concerns that are out there?
I think it's as good as it's going to get, and I agree with Martin. There's a distinction between insider trading and sports betting integrity, and when it comes to sports, right, there is an integrity monitoring in place at in the sports federations at that level, and the sports leagues. So you have a certain level of monitoring and protection going on and sharing of information at that level. But when it comes to trading on other events, right, politics, other kinds of things, I think that's where the exposure is, not so much on the sports betting side, but that's really, as Martin says, an insider trading problem. So when it comes to sports, I think there's enough protections in place, and as Bill said, whether you're betting on a licensed sports betting site or on Kalshi, you still have, and I'm sure we're going to get to this. We're going to talk about FIFA hopefully at some point, but there's significant integrity monitoring going on at that level.
Joe, can I just jump in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to everybody on this call, including you, know this, but maybe some viewers don't. This entire industry's only been up and running for 2 years. Okay, Kalshi's valuation speaks volumes about where we're at, and it's becoming too big to fail because the others behind Kalshi are significantly valued as well. However, last year, the arguments by many on the gaming regulatory side was, well, 89% of their, revenue is from sport. That's significantly changing. Okay. And like Jeremy just pointed out, other events, right? Look at what's going on. The bets that have been placed, hundreds of millions of dollars on where Taylor Swift's going to get married and when it is and what's the event around it. The Academy Awards, political events, just the weather, right? That's scaling. So there may be a point, I don't think it's going to happen, but there may be a point, I've certainly been wrong before, where the courts may tap down on sport, but they can't tap down on everything else, right? I don't think they'll be able to do that. And that's where Kalshi and Poly and Robinhood and CME, Crypto.com are being very nimble about this. In addition to their lobbying strategy, they've got a very significant legal strategy. And the lawyers they've hired are the best and the brightest. And states have been making the mistake of utilizing in-house AGs who are all very good and adept, but they're not arguing before Supreme Courts on a regular basis.
Perhaps if I may chime in a similar vein, 2 points. And as usual, I agree with Bill. That's what we tend to do. That's why we've been such good friends for years and years. The same, of course, goes for Jeremy, also in matter of respect. So one, in terms of the states, and perhaps some of the audience would have heard me say that before, because I definitely did say that at some of the events where I was asked to speak about prediction markets. I appreciate, I even see why the states right now would feel angered and would be inclined, or have been in many instances inclined, to go down the litigation route. But at the same time, at least in parallel, I'd be, if I were them, and who am I to give them any advice, but if I were them, if I were to step into their shoes, I'd be inclined to have a thing about potentially extending and expanding the portfolio of betting markets that they have cataloged, that they have permitted. And I'm not necessarily talking the likes of the elections. I appreciate that. That's what Kalshi Polymarkets, all of them do that. In my book, that's largely a no-no. But, expansion to some of the other event categories that might be better controllable. This way, the states, and that is the point, could put themselves into an even attractive place or position for the licensees or future licensees. So that is one. And I suppose to Bill's other point, at the risk of stating the obvious, the young folks, but I reckon it goes for everybody else. It's the simplicity, of course, there's maps behind it and all that. But if you come to Kalshi's website or Polymarket site, crypto.com, it's the simplicity of the offering. It's effectively yes or no. Again, more nuances, but yes or no. Here's 1, here's 0. These are the two values. Take your pick. I believe as a traditional gambling industry, and mind you, I spent years and years lobbying for regulation of betting exchanges. Not a product that in my book would not be dissimilar to this, but I think what as an industry we might have slightly guilty of is the fact that a lot of our products these days tend to be very, very convoluted. Come to us and build a 30-bet parlay. I appreciate it might be attractive for some folks out there, but for the critical mass of bettors, I would suggest, and that's what the millions, if not billions of dollars that are now streaming through the Kalshis of this world demonstrate. There's a lot to be said about the simplicity of that offering.
Okay, I don't want to. That's fantastic stuff, guys. I don't want to only talk about predictions on this this webinar because that's stuff to get to. But we have to. I think we should ask the question because I think it's a very interesting one, and I've promised that we will. So, although it might feel like it, this current administration in the US won't go on forever. At some point, someone else will be in charge. I mean, you've talked about it already, but well documented the backing that the Trump administration has given to prediction markets. Some family members have financial interests, so on and so on. I mean, what do you think? Do you think this is a sort of golden era for this growing segment? And when we have new political overlords, things might not look quite so rosy, or are they resilient enough to survive? I mean, Jeremy, if you could start on that.
Yeah, I think that when there is a change in administration, it's going to be too late, right? So this is sort of the golden era. As Bill said, and I'm no Trump fan either, but this is the time. So it's up, it's running. We'll probably see some changes in CFTC regulation to moderate things a little bit, but it's nearly impossible to unring a bell. So if 2 or 3 years from now there's a new administration, I just don't see a scenario where an entire industry worth billions and billions is going to be just completely shut down. There's too much money at stake, and money is what's going to win this game from a lobbying point of view. And I just don't see a scenario where the switch is just turned off. I think the ship has sailed at this point, so it's here to stay in some shape or form. But I don't think you're going to see any major shift.
Bill, you agree with that?
A political layman.
Yeah, right. Understood. Thank you, Jeremy. Bill, yeah, does that ring true for you?
Here's what I would say. You tell me one person who would have speculated, predicted that the United States government would face on January 6th of 2021 a insurrection. And then 4 years later, all those blokes that were indicted by the federal government and thrown in jail for their bloody massacre would be pardoned by the President of the United States. Number two, anybody who prognosticates, I agree with what Jeremy said, but anybody who prognosticates that they know what's going to happen either sort of the Supreme Court level or in 2028 with the presidential elections. You can speculate on who's going to win, but this is not going to be the seminal issue for any new administration, whether it's Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Gavin Newsom, or any of the other Democrats. It's not the top of mind of most politicians. And so, like I said earlier in a different way to support what Jeremy just said, it's become too big to fail. And you're seeing folks from Oceania, LATAM, Europe, perhaps soon Africa, coming in with their own predictive markets modeling to get in while the swimming is good right now. So yeah, I think it's too big to fail. It will continue to be. I think the state regulators, who are all friends of Martin, Jeremy, and I talk to regularly about this. I'm concerned for them. They get a little cranky when I say this, but they may be out of business in 3 to 4 years unless they find a way to have what I call an elegant solution with the federal overarching authority and some state interplay. If they don't do that, prediction markets are going to get into the casino space soon enough. I think they've been wise to hold back on that, but they're ready to pull the trigger on that too.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point about casino space. We'll come on to talk about that more generally in a minute. Martin, although I know you've been in the US for a while, but you have still probably something of an outsider's view. I mean, where do you see this going?
Oh, couple of points, if I may. When it comes to the administration, as a green card holder, I need to be careful how I approach that until hopefully, fingers crossed, I've got my citizenship and will be fully protected by the First Amendment.
I'm in Canada at the moment, so I can say whatever I want. No.
Good for you. Good for you. Another bad place to be, of course. Anyway, what I was going to say, perhaps slightly controversially, to come back to what I said at the beginning of this recording. Like, to me, this feels like a rerun of what the adjacent sectors have already experienced. As you would all know, at the very start, it just differs as to how long that era has been, but there's a golden era, but inevitably, even to a large, not to a full, but to a large extent, regardless of who's in charge in what country, every single new industry starts running into more and more red tape or regulation. So in my book, long story short, it will just come down, and that's where politics come in, and what kind of administration will be running the United States of America from the 20th of January 2029 onwards. It will depend how much of that red tape there will be. But to come full circle, at the risk of stating the obvious, Bill's and Jeremy's points about Kalshi, Polymarket, and the others having had a great legal and regulatory strategy, it would appear to me that these guys are more than smart and have realized that they will need to start going down this route to keep shoring up their regulatory position. Because in my view, this is the ideal outcome for anyone in this space, to be agnostic of who's running the country. And in my view, the only way to get there is by means of accepting that there will be more and more regulation, but ideally, I suppose, from their economic perspective, it would be very, very gradual. Coming back to the guidance, insider trading and some of the less mall markets. Let's see what the next step is, but it will be at stages. And in the meantime, they're generating traffic and they're expanding their customer bases. The other point, indeed, if you look at the rest of the world, in some jurisdictions, there's been a very negative reaction to prediction markets. Now, the usual suspects, and all due respect and love I can muster for these countries, it's their decision to make. France, the Netherlands, a few other countries in Europe has been elated, as you might be aware. lately there's been a joint statement by 9 or 10 European regulators against prediction markets. Then there's a group that sits somewhere in the middle, like the UKGC, it would appear from its negotiations with Kalshi and the others, that they would be prepared to welcome Kalshi to the country as long as, that's the operative part, as long as Kalshi and the rest are prepared to obtain a UKGC license. And of course, to Jeremy's critical point, start paying taxes in the United Kingdom. Brazil has a ban, at least of the sports elements of prediction markets, but it would appear that there's a certain ever-growing chance that Brazil will end up regulating prediction markets as well. So they've been following this strategy. And ultimately, final point I promise, so you all will be aware as well, Gibraltar, one of the hubs of global online gambling, at least in the past, has now introduced a regulatory scheme that allows for licensing of prediction markets. So the focus has been on the United States. To Bill's point, the other countries have not been sitting idly on their hands, and some of them have come to the conclusion that it would be preferable to regulate prediction markets and try to tax them as opposed to try to go down the route of banning them.
Yeah, definitely. That's seeing that globally is very interesting. We can. We're not going to talk about prediction markets anymore, though we could talk about them for hours and hours and hours. But maybe we sort of are, because I'd like to ask about iGaming. I mean, it's the question of whether which states are going to open up, if any more states are going to open up, it's been asked many times, and the answer is usually not really, maybe. But I mean, so I have that question, Jeremy. I'll start with you. If there are any kind of realistic prospects, but I'll also throw in another question: does it matter as much anymore when you have maybe, as Bill hinted, prediction markets could move into this space? You've got sweepstakes knocking around. Is it as critical a question as it used to be?
Joe, we've been doing these quarterly updates for years now, the three of us, and every time any one of us tries to predict, expansion of iGaming, we always get it wrong. So I've stopped trying to guess. Ironically, I wonder if Polymarket or the others are offering, markets on, what states are going to expand into iGaming and when. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know. Right. Every time we think we're on the cusp, whether it's New York or Maryland, Virginia, or whatever, it doesn't happen. The legislative session ends, the bill gets killed, and we're done. So I'm not making any predictions. Does it matter? I think it does. I don't know if we're gonna have time to talk about sweepstakes. You mentioned sweeps. That's in decline. That's a whole nother, we can spend an hour talking about sweeps. So I think it does matter. It matters from the operator's point of view, because that's where all the revenue is. That's where they're making their money, in iGaming, not in sports betting. So, and you also have, the states are leaving, tax revenue on the table. Again, it always comes back to money and taxes. So I do think it matters. I wish that we collectively, the industry had a better strategy for expansion, but I am not making any predictions about what's going to happen in the near future.
Fair enough. I mean, Bill, I won't ask you to make a prediction, although if you want to be my guest, but what's your kind of view on the direction of iGaming?
Well, there's been a couple of folks who are friends of ours who've been trying to be the point of the spear at tackling further expansion. And, they have not been successful. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think their strategy is flawed. Number one. Number two, I think there's going to be an opportunity, because of what's happened with the sweepstakes industry, to collaborate now that the sweepstakes industry, companies like VGW, the largest sweeps in the world, with a massive market share, have now pivoted from being anti-regulation and tax to being supportive of it now because they got their clock clean the last 2 years. And so I think that the whole issue of what stakes next on iGaming is not going to be really relevant anymore because it's going to happen. There'll be collaboration with sweeps that will allow for penetration and movement in states that haven't been supportive of it but have tried or attempted to. And I do think that in the relative near future, within 2 years, the predictive markets, they've received good counsel, and I'll leave it at that, not to get into casino, but they're going to. And I think when that happens, it won't really matter what states move iGaming. I think states are silly to do it because all their consumers or constituents are doing it in the black market. And so, they're so focused on sweeps and predictive markets, they haven't thought about how to capture revenue by just passing iGaming legislation. But there hasn't been a good job of educating. So those folks that were running the campaigns to bring iGaming to states, when they saw their jobs in jeopardy, they pivoted to banning sweeps. And now the sweepstakes industry is pivoting, and they have massive money to do it. So I think that the whole issue of iGaming, who's next, is becoming less and less significant because of the pivot that prediction markets are going to do, because of the pivot that sweepstakes have done. And so that's my thoughts on
that. Thank you. Martin, I guess maybe I could ask you this question in a slightly different way, as I know you spend a lot of time thinking about responsible gambling in the past. I mean, so if that does happen, if Bill's prediction comes to pass, and then it kind of the decision's taken out of the state's hands, I mean, is that concerning to you from that standpoint?
Well, first of all, it should be concerning to the states. I agree with Bill and Jeremy that the window of opportunity to regulate online casino or iGaming, whatever you may want to call it, will inevitably shut. At the same time, though trying to contradict myself, what better motivation driver as a state you would want to have to finally go and regulate online casino? In light of the advent and rise of prediction markets, and now the sweeps, and of course, as a sidebar, that in my book's been the biggest difference between sweeps and prediction markets. Prediction markets got themselves regulated. Some folks think that's controversial, but the fact is that they are regulated. The sweeps, until recently, had been ferociously opposed to it. And now the sweeps need to pivot, whereas prediction markets will carry on doing their own thing. And as Bill said, they might start eating into the space and taking oxygen out of what used to be the ecosystem of sweeps, and also at the same time the more traditional online gambling industry. To address your question about responsible gambling, 2 points. One, I do believe, and you may have seen that Kalshi, whatever we might think, with all due respect about the NCPG these days, they've partnered up the NCPG, which would appear to be a step in the right direction as long as it's backed up by substance. But that's not the point. The point is that in my view, they would be smart to, albeit gradually, as in the prediction markets platforms, they would be smart to step up their efforts to protect their customers. Because customers will not put up with just about everything. They will not. So it's part of that transition, future transition from within the current golden era to a market that most likely will still be very robust and solid and ideally stable. Let's see how it pans out politically, but will be subject to more stringent rules, my view. Folks out there may feel free to disagree. Because at the same time, and I will point out one final critical difference, again, my interpretation, between the more traditional world of sports betting and the world of trading or financial services. Even legally speaking, there's a higher level of risk built into any investment contract. So when you get to here, and I'm not necessarily defending it, again, I'm trying to state a fact, a legal fact. When you get to here, the likes of Kalshi Polymarket saying, well, a lot of this is on the customer himself or herself. I would suggest this is where they're coming from. So long story short, and that's the message I'm trying to convey, I'd be looking for a middle ground that would, of course, afford customers, be the customers of the traditional space or prediction markets ecosystem, a high level of protection, including all the information and tools they need to protect themselves, but they will need to be playing, as in the customers, the clients, the punters, they will need to be playing a role themselves.
Understood. Yes, thank you very much. So I guess, Jeremy, if I come back to you, I think we could talk about it for ages, but maybe as briefly as you can, because I think we should talk a bit about the World Cup as well. You mentioned sweepstakes and the sense that maybe we're on the downward trajectory there. Could you just talk a little bit about where you see that sector?
iGaming?
Sweepstakes.
Yeah. Oh, sweeps. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, look, I mean, I think we've all seen a plateau, right? So everyone was making as much money as they could in sweeps when it was unregulated. Now, more and more states are either banning it by legislation, being very aggressive in enforcement, either through the gaming regulators or state's attorney general with litigation, cease and desist, investigations, and now we're seeing more states where their gaming regulators are going after sweeps indirectly. We've talked about this in the past by targeting their licensed B2B suppliers and essentially requiring them to disclose whether they're also providing software and services to sweeps operators and telling them, that's a no-no. If you want to maintain your gaming license in our state, you have to shut your sweeps. So there's a plateau. Obviously, the aggressive enforcement is in the states where there are stakeholders that are pushing for it, right? So whether it's states that have land-based casinos or that have iGaming or some other form of gambling, and those guys who are paying taxes and paying license fees are saying, hey, you need to do something to stop this unregulated competition. But there will continue to be, in my view, a sizable number of states where it's unregulated and there's been no appetite to enforce it. And those are typically the states that don't have stakeholders that are pushing back on it. But on the other hand, we're also seeing operators being subject to, like in California, significant financial exposure in litigation by the government, by the state, not so much these private class action cases, and also B2Bs that are withdrawn because they just don't want to take the risk. And the biggest telltale sign, in my view, was when VGW, along with a number of B2Bs, were sued in California by the city attorney in Los Angeles, seeking significant, hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. That you had B2Bs that have no presence in the U.S. and are not licensed in the U.S. and probably have no intention of ever entering the U.S. market. That heretofore had been thumbing their nose at any sort of sweeps enforcement in the U.S. Have withdrawn completely from the sweepstakes market in the U.S. Primary example of that is what was it? Pragmatic, right? One of the largest B2Bs with no presence in the U.S. has said, you know what, I'm done. We're done with sweeps in the U.S. So I think it's plateaued. I think it's going to continue to shrink slowly. More and more states are going to pick off predictions, but I don't think it's ever going away.
Understood. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. Let's talk a bit about the World Cup currently going on as we speak. Some issues with FIFA aside, it's I've been really enjoying it. But I'm British, so it's kind of part of my culture, right, to enjoy the football or the soccer. So, but I'm interested in, from a US gambling industry perspective, what, if anything, you think the impact of this kind of World Cup has been, and if there's any kind of changing kind of legacy it will leave on the market in the future, or not? Will it be just a passing thing that everyone enjoys and then we go back to normal? Bill, if I could ask you first for World Cup thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, it's very important. I think most Europeaners, and for that matter, everybody outside the U.S., including Canada, have a greater appreciation and culture and legacy with soccer. Americans are not that, I don't want to use the term sophisticated, but they're not that knowledgeable about soccer. I love the fact that the spirit of the game is just extraordinarily exciting, emotional, the passion. I love that. I think it's really good that it's here. And I think what will happen is very similar to what happened to golf when Tiger Woods hit the scene. I think you're going to see more and more Americans taking up the game, interested in the game, observing the game. We have on Sunday mornings the Premier League and all of that, but we're just not that knowledgeable about it. In terms of, so I think it's going to end up being a very positive impact for Americans. I think that those who have come here from abroad have enjoyed it. I've loved the banter between, cultures and countries, but I also think it's extraordinarily good for the betting industry because I don't know if you've been monitoring, but the amount of bets being placed both on the PM side and on the traditional sportsbook side have been massive, and that's a good thing. And so far, there haven't been any controversies. Let's hope that continues. Your homeland is one of the favorites. My homeland is not one of the favorites, but we're moving on. So it'll be interesting.
I think you may have played better than the US may have played better than England so far. So I wouldn't be. I'm not going to say anything. Martin, how are you feeling about the World Cup?
Well, my homeland is out. Good thing is that my wife happens to be Brazilian, so I've got an adoptive homeland, and I'll be rooting for them throughout the rest of the tournament. And we happen to be down here in Brazil, so as you can imagine, it's been the game against Japan, and the same will go for the upcoming game against Norway. It's been an absolute madness. A lot of wrath and anger when Japan scored, and then outburst of love and emotions and passion, tears of joy when Brazil turned this game around. So that's just to illustrate that most countries around the world, with all due respect to my residential land, have historically had much more exposure to the game of soccer/football, to use the proper British expression. That is one. Secondly, we didn't come down here till last week. So I had the privilege and pleasure of having been to 2 World Cup games live. But you may not be able to see Bill's t-shirt, but he's sporting a Knicks t-shirt. So that was the first reason why, at least in the tri-state area, most definitely in the New York City metropolitan area, not many folks would have really cared about the World Cup, at least at the initial stages, go Knicks. Now, reportedly, good old Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce might be getting married in the garden tomorrow. Oh, that's what I presume the whole of America will be watching. So in that regard, and it's all in the best of spirits and part of our banter here, no, World Cup has most definitely been very good and very productive for the PM and the betting industry. I agree with that. The question is whether it will turn out to be or won't turn out to be sort of a one-off, bit like the 94 World Cup back in the States, of course. But, with the seemingly unstoppable increase in the size of the Latino population in the United States, it's bound to grow ever more popular. But at the same time, that is the final point. Now, the American football season is just around the corner. So, Cometh, especially the start of the regular season around Labor Day, I guess the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, might become a rather distant memory.
Yeah, good point. Jeremy, what if anything the legacy of the World Cup on US gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Bill and Martin. I mean, it's created such tremendous awareness among Americans who just are not soccer fans, right? I've watched just about every game I can watch. It has an energy level that that we don't see in a lot of other American sports, and the most fascinating thing to me is that hundreds of thousands of people have traveled from all over the world to without a ticket to the game, and to basically camp out in weird places around the U.S. to hang out around the practice fields of their home country's team for weeks and weeks, and spend money. And that's a phenomenon that we're just not used to. Apart maybe from the Super Bowl, where people will travel to the Super Bowl if they're a fan and they can't get into the game, but they'll just sort of hang around, for that weekend, and party and so on, and drink in the energy. Apart from that, I mean, there's nothing even remotely on the level of the World Cup. So, hopefully that energy and awareness will, carry over, and viewership will increase and so on. From an integrity point of view, I just took a quick look earlier. I don't think there are any reported cases of integrity problems, match fixing at all in this World Cup. Zero. FIFA's done a very good job in that sense. I think there are one or two players that earlier, in the last few months, were suspended or banned from playing in the World Cup for what's it called? Spot fixing, right? Around yellow cards, and there's inappropriate betting activity around that. But I'm not aware of any scandal at all in the last.
There aren't any.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
Yeah, very good point. Fantastic stuff. The Olympics coming in a couple of years as well to the US, so we'll have the world on your doorstep again. Bill, Jeremy, Martin, thank you very, very much indeed. Fascinating stuff as always. Hope it was engaging for those of you listening or watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care. Take care, everybody.
Vamos,
Happy
Brasil.
4th of July. Happy
Come on,
birthday,
everyone.
America.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy birthday, America.
Bye-bye.